But if you have ambitions of being the next Facebook or being the next Amazon, of being the next big company, you have to be global.
Yeah. This episode of Talking Tech is brought to you by Seoul GSC. It's a brand new facility in the heart of Seoul that's dedicated to supporting foreign entrepreneurs entering the Korean market. They offer a range of support, including financial and legal advice and connections to local investors. They also offer free office space and co-working space. They are opening their brand new program for this spring, and you can apply on their website starting from February. You can apply on the website at seoulgsc.com. Well, thanks for coming in. This podcast it's obviously live on Facebook now, but we're also recording it. We'll be launching it as a new podcast from G3, which will probably start airing from early next month. Thanks for coming down. And so for people in the audience who are watching, Eric Kim is the co-founder and managing director of Goodwater Capital, based in Silicon Valley, but investing globally. And before Goodwater, you were obviously at Maverick, and made your first investment in Korea in 2011.
Right.
And have since invested in 4 Korean companies, which certainly 2 of them are now unicorns. One of them is a public company, Kakao. Also invested in Coupang and Memebox as well, who are, I think, one of Korea's rising stars for sure, globally. And most recently, Viva Republica.
Right.
So that's a quick encapsulation of my guest here, Eric. I wonder, just to set the context for this discussion as well, if you could just tell us a little bit about Maverick and what you're planning for this year.
Sure. Well, now that I'm at Goodwater, I can give you a little bit.
Goodwater.
So I was at Maverick for 7 years. It was a global firm, and we invested in all over the world, and that's where I had the great fortune and opportunity to make a couple of investments in Korea at the time, in Kakao's Series A in 2011, and Coupang's one of the earliest rounds in 2011 as well. 2014, had the opportunity to start with someone I went to business school with at Stanford, Chi-Hua Chien, who's very well known for having been the person who sourced the first investment in Facebook when he was at Excel Partners. Chi-Hua and I are longtime friends and very close, and in 2014 we had this vision and idea of starting a consumer-focused venture capital firm. We were focused completely on consumer tech. You might be investing in a simple texting app or in a 142-character blogging site, but that companies like Twitter and Facebook and Snapchat and Kakao have the impact on really touching literally billions of lives. But we're also global, so we invest both in North America, all around the world, but primarily rest of the world for us is Asia as well. And because of some of the early success we had in Korea as well, we've made a number of investments in Korea, like you mentioned too.
Yeah. And what is the typical check size for Goodwater at the moment?
Yeah, so we are really focused. We don't do seed. We're really focused on the solid Series A and beyond. So our check sizes will typically be on the smaller side, $2 to $3 million, going up to sometimes as large as $20, $25 million as well. So we really have the ability to scale depending on the stage. What's unique about consumer tech is that whether it's a Series A, B, or C, if the company's going well, if you're a Facebook Series A investor or a Facebook Series C investor, you're still really, really happy with the outcome. But consumer tech has the property of it is that at different stages that the company's doing well, you still have this 10x type potential, even if it's a little bit later. But we will really focus on the Series A through Series C.
Yeah, cool. Now, on paper, you're certainly one of the most successful investors investing in Korea. I think your Korean portfolio now is worth well over $10 billion. And you started investing in Korea before the hype of the startup ecosystem in Korea, and we'll talk a bit about that later on. But how did you find the rising stars at an early stage in Korea from the US?
That's a great question. It's something that we get asked a lot because we invest in so many parts of the world. But for us, it's really about having a global standard. So whether it's a startup in Silicon Valley or a startup here in Seoul or Shanghai or Indonesia, these are places we've invested in all around the world. We have a global standard so that our hope is that anytime someone sees that, oh, they were invested by Goodwater, that intrinsically means that they have $1 billion plus potential.
Yeah.
Because we see that at a global standard, they are at par or above their global peers in the group that they are competing against.
Yeah.
Because we really think it's a competition for capital, the best ideas, and the best people across the world. And so we're really hopeful to look at things through that filter, and that allows things. So when with the iPhone launch and with the app ecosystem coming up, really coming of age, what was going to be the killer app? So back then, in 2009, 2010, 2011, messaging, communications was a really important theme that we were pursuing. And Sequoia at the time did a great job of identifying this small company called WhatsApp.
Right.
It wasn't because WhatsApp was huge in the US by any means. It wasn't. It was primarily, back then, a UK and South Africa kind of texting app so that people could basically communicate across borders.
Yeah.
At the same time, in that same theme, if you looked at that theme and the companies that were competing in that theme, there are of course Silicon Valley companies, more the UK, maybe South Africa quarter companies like WhatsApp or international companies, and then in Asia, there's this little company called Kakao. And so again, because we're benchmarking at a global basis, we saw Kakao really rising up and getting the kind of traction that was really impressive, whether you looked at just the Korean ecosystem or globally or in Asia. It was head and shoulders above all the others, or comparable to WhatsApp at the time. So that's what gave us conviction and really this idea that, okay, this could be a huge potential winner. It matches or is doing better than its global peers, and let's aggressively gain conviction to do an investment in it. Same thing with Coupang in 2011. We were actually also investors in a company called Groupon at the time. And we were thinking, okay, where else can this theme of, back then it was social commerce, I think Coupang has done a great job of evolving to something much more important and bigger now.
The Amazon of
the
Korea.
Amazon, just really, what is your everyday shopping experience for anything you need? But then it was really around, okay, call it mobile commerce 2.0 or commerce 2.0. Where in the world would this theme be best expressed? So it wasn't like I had just gone on a plane to Korea and say, okay, I want to invest in Korea. We were looking at startups in Brazil, in China, in India, in Europe, in different parts of Europe, Germany, UK. There were lots of different 2.0 commerce 2.0 companies coming to starting up at the time. And then you look at this company, Coupang. By any global standard, it was doing better than its peers.
Right.
And of course, if you were in Korea, you would have noticed, hey, it was the 28th company of its kind to have launched. Ticket Monster was the first, and then by the time I think we had invested, there was well over 100 or so at that point. And but if you had benchmarked versus not just its peer in Korea, but also in Asia and then globally, it was doing much better and at really driving value around brand loyalty, customer experience, mobile, all these things. So for us, that's what drove us to get conviction around it. And now if you look at our portfolio today, whether it's Memebox, Viva Republica, another portfolio company we haven't talked about as much is Retrica, which is a global app that has been downloaded over 300 million times globally.
And that's a Korean company
That's a Korean company based in Korea, targeting global markets. They all are at the global standard.
Right.
So for us, it's like the Goodwater standard is a global standard. And if we make an investment, we believe it has that global potential or the potential to be valued, have the value of any leading global tech company.
Sure. Now, obviously, you're very well known in Korea. You've made some massive investments. But as a Silicon Valley VC, for example, who might be new to the Korean market, was your network in Korea extremely strong before you invested in Kakao and Coupang? And how would Silicon Valley investors kind of get into the kind of opportunities that you found back in the day?
Yeah. I think it's amazing to see how much the Korean startup ecosystem has progressed. So let me answer your question, but I'll start with a little bit of history.
Sure.
In that when I graduated from college, this was in the early 2000s, the first thing I did was actually work for a startup that was spun out of Stanford that was based here in Seoul, Korea.
Right.
Back then, it was extremely hard to raise money. there weren't these great startup spaces like Spark Plus and Mario 180 and Spark Labs, all that stuff.
Google Campus.
Google Campus. None of that was there. The government, it was amazingly different. That was only 15 years ago. Right. And so now I think it's amazing to see that you have incubators here that are amazing.
Yeah.
You have early stage investors here that are amazing. The Altos Venture folks, and they're extremely well connected here in Korea. For us, it was really important to have a relationship with investors like Altos, Han Kim, and Hien Park, and Moon, all those guys at the Altos team, and other venture firms, so that we could find local partners to also work with here in Korea. So to answer your question directly, I would think that for Silicon Valley investors or investors that are coming from other parts of the world, also finding people to work with here that local is extremely important. That people that can help be that bridge, that can help translate not just only language, but also culture, and then the way startups are can be nurtured here. It's really helpful to have a local partner as well, I would say.
So I guess also a very simple answer to that question is that it didn't start in 2011. It started 15 years ago when you came here as an entrepreneur, started building those networks. So I guess the advice for VCs is that if you want to invest in a market, you need to know it. You need to have a network.
Yeah, I think it starts with a global perspective,
right?
And that embracing that now with regards to specifically technology and consumer tech, there are no meaningful borders anymore.
Right.
With regards to technology, you can be an app in Shanghai. One of the companies we invested in is a company called Musical.ly that's based out of Shanghai, and they have, I think, over 100 million registered users or downloads that are not in China, most of them being in the U.S. and North America. That really, to be an investor in this day and age, it's really important to have this global perspective, and that Korea being one of the most important markets for consumer tech, really embracing that is really important. For us, maybe I'm giving away too much of our secrets, but having a global perspective, an eye on the Asian markets, seeing what's going on with gaming, with commerce here, with mobile here in Korea, also in China and Southeast Asia, will also help with your investments in the Valley as well, and vice versa. Because obviously there's a lot to learn from the Valley that can be applied here too.
Cool. Now we've spoken a bit about it. The Korean startup ecosystem now is completely different from 15 years ago.
Right.
I think it's completely different from even 5 years ago, when I got involved here. So what is driving this? Is it just hype? What is driving this, and do you think it's sustainable? For the next 5-10 years? Is Korea hot?
I think it's. Part of it is, to some degree, hype. I think in any tech market there is a level of hype that is, frankly, healthy. That people need to understand the story.
PR, important.
PR is important. Understanding what the story is about, the essence of the story. I think Korea still hasn't fully told its story yet about what are the things that are really great about the Korean market and its role in the global market. I think that's underappreciated.
What are some of those things?
Well, I think that the fact that the infrastructure here, the wireless penetration, internet penetration is the highest in the world. The internet speeds are the highest in the world. There's the level of innovation, the pace of innovation that you can do in this market with this consumer. It's one of the highest GDP per capita as well. It's one of the most connected consumers in the world as well. What you can do in this market and innovate on this market, and the density is different than what you can do in maybe a slower paced environment.
You mentioned density, and I think it was Han Kim that first pointed it out, actually, that the top 10 cities in Korea are equivalent in population to the top 10 cities in the US. And obviously Seoul, 26 million people. That's pretty good if you're in e-commerce like Coupang are, or generally for the spread of any kind of new technology.
I think Korea itself has the landmass of Indiana, the state of Indiana, but with 50 plus million people. And if you take out all the inhabitable or the mountainous regions, it's even smaller than that, and even more dense. So the density is an important part, I think, of countries like Korea, cities like Seoul, also Shanghai, also Beijing, also Jakarta, Singapore. These really dense urban cities with high, internet penetration, fast mobile, smartphone penetration being really high, I think will be the hotbeds of innovation.
Well, we're not going to talk a lot about trends, but I think there's one kind of trend that a lot of people are talking about these days, fintech. I was in Hong Kong a few months ago, spoke to a lot of people. There was a lot of talk about fintech, but couldn't find very many success cases. Now, obviously, Viva Republica, your most recent investment, I believe, transacted over $3 billion in payments. Kakao has also recently launched services, mobile-only services for banking. Is fintech a trend in Korea, or are there a couple of outliers that are doing very well?
Yeah, I think it's a global trend.
Yeah.
So the way we came across the investment in Viva Republica, the developers of the popular app Toss, or Toss, we were looking at P2P, and that our overall thesis and our belief is that this millennial customer will be unlike its parents' generation, where we went into a bank, we signed a bunch of forms, and we got into the banking system that way with paper checks and monthly statements, all this stuff. The millennial customer will get into financial services or consumer financial services through this phone, through our phones, through their mobile device. And so we thought about, okay, what are the consumer financial services that are most applicable to mobile, P2P being a big one of those, peer-to-peer payments and transactions. And so we looked again, the global standard, companies, PayPal, Venmo, Square Cash. This company called Viva Republica was outpacing in growth than all those companies if you benchmark them over history. And if you look at just today's standards, it was one of the fastest growing apps and services, not just on users, but also in transaction growth. I think they're over just the past year have gone from essentially nothing to over 3.6 billion plus in terms of transaction volume rate. It's 3.6 billion US dollars for a little startup. That's unheard of. It's faster than how Venmo grew. It's faster than, I believe, how PayPal grew, how Square grew in the US. And so again, if you adopting the global standard, for us to see that, I think it's an interesting case example. But to your point around hype or the trends, like we see trends at a global level, and of course there are some localizations that's really important. But when we see a company like Viva Republica, we can understand that. I think a lot of people in the world are coming to understand that as well.
So moving on to the next topic, a lot of people were saying that 2016 was a bit of a down year for Korean investments, and I think this is largely due to kind of a glut of huge investments in 2014 and 2015. I think during that period, Coupang alone raised $1.4 billion, and there was a few other massive investments between kind of 50 and 100 million. So the overall numbers are certainly down in 2016, but should we be concerned about that? Will there be, can you tell us about that a little bit?
Well, I think the investment in Coupang, especially the SoftBank round in 2015 of $1 billion.
Unprecedented.
At the $5 billion. It was the largest deal at that point in that year globally. I think Uber then did some massive $2 billion, fundraising. But again, of that scale, where it's raising as much, if not more, than most of the startups up there, and on par with the likes of Uber, and so that was a really big, unprecedented round globally. And it was happened to happen here in Korea, which is amazing. And I think that 2016, you still saw companies like Memebox that raised over $120 million in 2016 alone. And so there are these companies that, if they have the breakout potential, I think they're able to continue to attract capital at a global level. Yes, on an absolute number basis, because there's this amazing pop in with Coupang of the $1 billion in 2015. Now, as markets like Korea in the overall global landscape mature and continue to get startups, I think to one of your earlier questions, is it all hype? Well, I think it's actually success begets success. So Kakao was an early investment. When it did the reverse merger into Daum, they were listed at $9.5 billion. The combined value. And so things like that will drive and attract more investment. So to some extent it's hype, but being able to have this very virtuous cycle of investment and then return of capital. Investment, return of capital, and then sparking more entrepreneurs who have that great experience of working at a Kakao or Coupang or some of these other companies, that they go and then start their own companies as well. I think is a really important ingredient for these ecosystems.
It's one thing Korea simply didn't have, even going back, I would say 4 years, 5 years. It was pre kind of Kakao IPO, before Coupang had really blown up, I think. You're seeing people like Jung-hee Yu coming back into the ecosystem, investing. So I think you're right. There's a bigger mentor pool. There's a bigger pool of angel investors who know what they're doing.
Right.
Everyone compares, their local ecosystem to Silicon Valley. People need to remember it didn't happen in 3 or 4 years.
Right. It took a long time, and we've had our ups and downs as well.
So kind of talking about cultural barriers. There are profound cultural barriers and perhaps other barriers as well that exist between East and West. That's obvious. But we're becoming much more global. How can either entrepreneurs or investors from elsewhere in the world effectively, especially the West, effectively engage in Korea, in Asia, and kind of cut through these cultural barriers? Now, you've got something of an advantage because you are ethnically Korean, but how can we bridge these barriers from a cultural perspective?
Yeah, I think my answer might be a little bit counterintuitive, but it's really, for me at least, embracing this notion of humility. So at Goodwater, we have 5 core values: integrity, service, transparency, quality, and humility that are really important to our day-to-day work. For all the team members at Goodwater, it's really about embracing from a humble perspective that there are these great things about cultures that are different.
Yeah.
So that not just when I'm in Korea, but when I go to China to do a deal, or it's in Indonesia. So we've done deals in Indonesia and China in the past couple years as well, in addition to Korea, that have been outside of the valley, where we come from a perspective that we don't know everything. We have an inkling of what could be really interesting based on what we've learned and based on what we've seen from a global, that global standard. Yeah. For us, it's something we talk about every day, every week. At the firm, and really important to how we practice our global investments as well. Yeah,
well, obviously I'm not Korean, and I would absolutely agree. I think humility is extremely important. There are things that are different about Asia. There's things that you might even think are wrong, but I think what's really important to understand is that different doesn't mean that it's bad, that it should be done the way you expect it. Talking about that, whether it's VCs or startups looking at Asia, Korea specifically, as a market to expand into. There's a lot of startups in Korea now. There's a lot more than there were 5-10 years ago. Many would argue that there's too many startups right now, that it's almost too easy to found a company in Korea. Is there a way of kind of cutting through that hype and finding the good opportunities?
Right.
And maybe, do you even agree that there are too many startups here?
Well, the first part of your question, I think, is essential to us as an investor to really understand which companies are breaking out and have the most potential, and who we can be value-add investors to. Yeah. We're not going to be investors in every great company necessarily, unless it's a great fit for, again, consumer tech and that upside potential, what they want to really become someday. What I do think is really important is that there is integrity that is being brought to investment decisions. How much value has really been created? If we put $1 into this investment in 5, 10, 20, 30, and we're very long-term in our perspective, how have we helped create value for everyone? Now, equity value and valuations is just one metric of measuring it. We're not trying to just look at that. There's broader impact, we think, beyond that in terms of the impact to consumers, the impact to the ecosystem, to the overall funding environment. But our hope is that it becomes that the way investors will continue to come back to the market and make it sustainable over time is that really the best ideas, it's meritocratic, that the best ideas, the best startups, the best consumer experiences really are able to thrive in this kind of market. And so hopefully through the noise, what I want to hopefully contribute to is making sure those best ideas continue to be curated and fostered and nurtured over time here.
Network is important. I believe extremely powerfully in the value of a strong network. You do obviously as well. Are there specific people that you would recommend investors speak to in Korea?
Sure.
From outside of Korea?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different concentric circles. I think of former founders, now angel investors,
right.
seed investors, Series A investors, growth stage investors, even public investors. That all can be really helpful. And thinking a little bit systematically about those concentric circles, I think, can be helpful in any market. Here in Korea, we are big fans of Altos Ventures, of seed or incubators like Spark Labs. I think it's great to see people really try to embrace startups at the earliest of stages as well. Qualcomm Ventures, KTB. There's a number of also local investors. SoftBank has had a really positive impact on the Korean market as well.
There's a pretty big increase in the number of foreign investors with offices here as well. So that there's people from the Valley who have offices here.
Yeah, and I think that having that infrastructure, it's amazing how easy it is to set up offices here now,
right?
Versus before. And so the incorporation or getting space and Class A space. I mean, this is beautiful. This is better than what you see in most parts of the Valley,
right.
frankly, like this space alone. And so all that infrastructure is really paying off, I think, to attract investors and startups as well here.
We've spoken quite a bit about how investors can engage, but for startups from outside Korea, there is quite a bit of government support now for foreign startups. There's co-working spaces, there's financial support. K-Star Grand Challenge last year was quite successful, bringing 40 international companies to Korea. What should they expect when they arrive? I mean, no new market's going to be easy or quick or cheap.
Right.
So for foreign startups looking to expand into Asia, maybe specifically Korea, what can they expect when they actually arrive?
Yeah. I haven't done it before, so I'm not quite sure. But my initial thoughts on that is that opportunistically, I think it can seem like a great idea to come here because of the co-working space or maybe the government funding or these elements. And so I think, though, tying it back to your basic business rationale of why we exist for a startup is really important. So what about being in Korea, aside from the great infrastructure, aside from the co-working space, aside maybe from the government funding, what strategically, is it the consumer hardware ecosystem, the IoT ecosystem? Is it the mobile gaming ecosystem? Is it just that you want to be able to experience commerce at this fast pace? Is it that will help drive your innovation, your process better than being somewhere else? So if that comes back to that rationale, and there's a lot of very specific things, and sometimes it's not obvious, but there are great things being done in IoT, or there are great things being done in gaming, there are great things being done in mobile, there are great things being done in healthcare as well. That if there are specific things that you can draw on, or expertise or people, I think the people power of the quality of talent in Korea, whether it's engineering or management, is really amazing. And that's ultimately what will drive a lot of value. And for startups as well that might not be quote unquote Korean, that want to come to this country to operate, hopefully for them it will be also a talent attraction as well.
Well, on the talent side, recent stats, 65% of Koreans have a university degree. And I think, for that top talent, it's 30% cheaper to hire top Korean developers than it is in the Valley, for example. So there is a good talent pool here.
Yeah, well, hopefully more than the cost arbitrage. It's about the
quality of the people.
Quality of the people, and no, it's great. It's amazing. I mean, you find people and founders and technologists here that are extremely passionate about the markets they're pursuing, extremely passionate about innovation, about creating something of lasting value. And so I think that's really just been really pleasant to operate.
We've talked about kind of global and expansion. Thinking about practical tips, beyond the kind of buzz phrases like thinking global and acting local. Sure. What are some very practical steps that startups in the early stages should be taking to queue themselves up to expand successfully?
Yeah.
So, is it jumping on a plane and flying to every potential market and spending some time there? Or, what should they do at a practical level?
Yeah. I'll use Memebox as an example
to
answer the question. In that, what Dino did at a very early stage was to pack his bags and the team's bags, go in his co-founder. They went to the Valley and they went through Y Combinator.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, for them, Y Combinator in of itself was attractive, right? But also they felt that their product, Korean Beauty, K-Beauty, had a global product to market fit.
Yeah.
That was even more attractive than the domestic market here.
Right.
Domestic market is obviously very attractive for them too, but for them it was really about bringing K-Beauty to the rest of the world. So for products and services, to think global at an early stage, if you are a company, now not every company has to be global, every startup in Korea, but if you're a startup that has global ambitions, but because there's a why, there's a rationale that your product has a product to market fit literally to a geographic market, like Memebox had with China in particular, US in particular, Southeast Asia, K-Beauty really being on the rise, that they really packed their bags, they tactically went out, they put a stake in the ground, they put office space up, they ran out, and they really embraced team members as well from those regions. And they said, you know what, it's not just an expansion strategy for us. It's a core part of our identity, is that our product from here has a global presence and a global reach that is really essential to our identity. And so that's, I think, Memebox has done an incredible job of doing that from the earliest stages, from their seed stage, essentially.
And I think even long before they got into YC, they had an office in San Francisco. I think that's right.
I think they may have had a presence, but
right.
They had that ambition and really wanted to bring it abroad for them.
So, I mean, you've talked about spending a lot of time on planes. Is travel really the best way of getting to know a market?
Being on the ground is incredibly important, and technology can certainly aid in understanding. We're constantly on WhatsApp, WeChat, Kakao, Line, Facebook Messenger. So communications, the companies we're investing in play a role also in continuing to understand local cultures and how to have that presence and that network. But there's nothing like I don't think we'll ever replace having an in-person meeting.
Yeah, we've found it at G3 as well. We've been approached by quite a few companies that do believe that they want to have a base in Korea, and they've said we've got a budget of $1,500 a month. Please help us enter Korea. Okay, well, first step, can your founder come over and see the market? Right. Oh no, we don't have budget for that.
Right.
It's not going to work, is it?
Yeah.
You need to have more of a commitment than that. And I think the founder, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the founder himself needs to spend time in these new markets.
Yeah. It's also true the other way around, in that with the entrepreneurs we've been fortunate to partner with here in Korea, also making sure they go out, they see what's going on in China, they see what's going on in Southeast Asia, they see what's going on in Silicon Valley as well. I think it's really important for them to step outside of their comfort zones, or what might be their comfort zones, and jump on that plane and see other markets too.
Okay. And final question.
Sure.
So there will be a lot of companies outside of Asia. They're looking at Asia, wondering where to, jump into first. Personally, I think that Korea does make sense as a test market for Asia. I think it makes more sense than China and Japan for a number of reasons. For your portfolio, which country in Asia are they looking at, and what are the benefits of Korea, perhaps, for that they're seeing?
So specific more to our Valley portfolio, or
yes, yeah.
I think it's part of the conversation, right? Korea is an important part of the discourse around understanding international, about understanding the another set of consumers. It's really important to emphasize, in this day and age, if Snapchat wants to be a successful global company of billions of dollars in market cap, they must be global.
Right.
I think there was news of its most recent foreign office in the UK.
Yeah.
Right. But
headquarters, I think.
Is it? I don't know if it's their global headquarters, but
I might have misread. But
but they have a presence now outside of the U.S.
Yeah.
For any company that wants to reach beyond the U.S., any U.S. company that wants to reach beyond the 300 million population of the U.S. is a big market. But if you have ambitions of being the next Facebook or being the next Amazon, of being the next big company, you have to be global.
Yeah.
It's just by definition. To get enough market cap, get enough users, get enough revenue, audience time, you have to be global, right? Facebook's, most of its growth is coming from outside of the U.S. 90% or so, I believe, is coming from outside of the U.S. at this point. So that's where I think countries like Korea can play an incredible role in helping companies that were startups in the U.S., and we talk to our startups about this all the time in the U.S., is as they think about global expansion, that they should think about it earlier than they might have thought about it 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Because of the fierceness of global competition, that you're going to have copycats coming up really quickly, that you really need to get into those markets as soon as possible. Now, you can do whatever you want, but you can't do necessarily everything you want, so you have to focus. But at the same time, having your eye on global and using maybe Korea because of its great infrastructure to start to innovate on and to get a sense of where you could be in East Asia. Now, I think Singapore used to be that hub because it was English speaking for a lot of global operations to start off in Singapore. I think Korea has equally, or if not potentially a better opportunity, just because it's of the advanced population in terms of the size and the GDP per population and the great infrastructure, that they can really not just have operations but also a great end consumer market here as well.
Yeah.
So it can be a really interesting center for operations too. And so I think that's the opportunity for a lot of startups to look at Korea to be a hub for them in Asia and also as part of their overall global ambitions.
Great. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It was great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.